in Ukraine, and indeed there is a government initiative, Researchers at Risk, to help bring Ukrainian scientists here to the UK. We'll hear more from that from our next guest, Conservative MP and Technical and Digital Economy Minister Chris Philp, who joins me. But if we may, Minister, first I want to take you to the developments. As you'll be aware, vast expansion of the NATO deployment in the area to some 300,000 personnel. And this comes as your senior colleague Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, will today call for increased investment in defence and indeed increased manpower. Would you support that? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Well, obviously we're spending just over 2% of GDP on our armed forces already, which is slightly above the NATO guidance, which is 2%, which not all NATO countries, by the way, are meeting. And we would certainly encourage all NATO members to get up to that 2% as quickly as possible. In relation to the Ben Wallace comment you mentioned, clearly Secretaries of State are perfectly entitled to raise these issues with the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, as Ben Wallace is doing. Obviously, the Prime Minister and Chancellor have to balance all of the spending requests across the whole of government and have regard to the wider economy as well, and they'll obviously do that in a measured and balanced way.
Yes, my question is, would you support it?
Well, I'm not the Chancellor, and I don't have access to all of the
No, but you are
data.
a government minister, and if Mr Wallace is, I understand, going to say that he wants to increase it from 2 to 2.5% of GDP by 2028, were that to be presented in front of you, is it something you could find yourself supporting?
Well, I mean, all of us would like to see our armed forces get as much money as possible, but
So
you've
you
got to
would
obviously
support
balance
it?
that. But hang on a second, no, I didn't quite say that, because you've got to balance that.
So you
because you've
wouldn't
got to balance
support
that.
it?
You've got to balance that with other demands on the economy. It's up to the Chancellor of the Exchequer to make the decision, not me. Because and the reason for that, I'm not trying to avoid the question.
Well,
the Chancellor of the Exchequer. The Chancellor, well, slightly, because the Chancellor of the Exchequer is the person that has access to all of the information across all government departments. He has access to all the data on where tax revenues are heading and everything else. So really, only a minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, with access, and the Prime Minister, with access to all of that information, can make those kind of decisions in the round. I mean, I don't have visibility of the totality of government expenditure.
All right, so you're not prepared to give me a yes or no on that. Do doctors deserve an additional 30% pay? Would that be a yes or no?
Well, I think no. I mean, obviously we support our doctors, but a 30% pay rise is enormous. And, I understand we've got inflation. It's about the same in the UK as it is in the OECD as a whole, almost exactly the same. But if everybody gets a sort of pay rise tomorrow across the whole economy, then all that will do is, that will then feed through into higher prices, because companies will have to put their prices up. In the case of the NHS, we'll have to put taxes up to fund it, and the excess money will just drive prices up even further. So you will find that if we have these sort of across-the-board pay increases that some people are calling for, it will just make the current inflation challenges, which I'm hoping and expecting are temporary, it'll make them worse, it'll drive inflation even higher, and it'll make inflation permanent, as we saw during the 1970s when the sort of wages chased up inflation. It became circular, like a dog chasing its tail. So I don't think that's the right response to the inflation challenges that we face, and that applies across the entire economy. What we are doing, as you know, is putting money in this year to help people, particularly on lower incomes, deal with the challenges of the inflation, which we hope is temporary. The £400 for fuel and the £650 for people on universal credit, the £150 council tax rebate, the cut in fuel duty, all of those things. Those are the things the government are doing. Adds up to £37 billion a year to deal with the problems this year. But if we have these across-the-board pay increases, it will just make the inflation challenge that is currently, I believe, temporary, permanent and worse, and that is bad for everybody.
Something else the government is doing is the Researchers at Risk scheme, which is going to be given some additional funding. If you would first explain what it is and then what extra funding is going to be provided, Minister.
Yeah, thank you. So it comes on top of the £1.3 billion we've already provided to Ukraine in military and economic assistance. It's a £10 million package being announced by the Prime Minister today, and it's designed to specifically help Ukrainian scientific researchers who need to temporarily come to the UK, come to a UK university, to continue their research work while the war is ongoing, because we're determined to make sure that the Ukrainian economy and the Ukrainian scientific community can bounce back quickly once the Russian invasion is repelled. So enabling those Ukrainian researchers to carry on their scientific research in these difficult circumstances is important, and that's what the £10 million announced today is designed to achieve.
Good luck with bringing those folk over and letting them continue their studies. Last couple of questions on a couple of other matters. The vote on the Northern Ireland Brexit deal. In the views of a former Prime Minister, this attempt to override it is illegal under international law, will not achieve its aims and will reduce British standing in the world. So says Theresa May. Is she right?
No, she's not. I respectfully disagree with Theresa May. First of all, I think it is legal. The International Law Commission's own report, I think it was in 2001, that talks about international obligations, makes clear that you do have this doctrine of necessity, which is when a state's vital interests are threatened by the way a treaty is being operated, then you can make changes, unilateral changes to that, providing you do it in such a way that it doesn't damage the interests of the other party, in this case, the European Union. What's happened is the protocol has been applied in a way that is essentially unreasonable, bearing in mind that United Kingdom food and animal products meet at least the same standards as the European Union's, and in fact is probably higher than a number of European Union countries that one could mention. So the way it's being operated isn't reasonable. It's undermining the Good Friday Agreement, which the protocol is explicitly supposed to respect. So we're still hoping for a negotiated agreement with the European Union, but if that's not possible, the proposals to create this red and green route are reasonable. So there's a green route if the goods are going to stay in Northern Ireland, where you don't have all the very bureaucratic and intrusive and excessive, frankly, checks. But if the goods are in the red route and they're going to go over the southern border from Northern Ireland into the Republic of Ireland and therefore into the single market area, then they will have all the checks. That's a reasonable and proportionate way of respecting the Good Friday Agreement, but also respecting the integrity of the European single market. We hope we can get a negotiated agreement, but if not, this bill will provide a basis for us to protect the Good Friday Agreement, which supposedly is what everybody is seeking to do.
But another of your colleagues, Andrew Mitchell, who was International Development Secretary, says that it could start a trade war with the EU if we, quotes, brazenly break a solemn international treaty, Minister.
Well, as I say, I think there's a clear basis in international law to do that. I hope it won't and don't expect it to trigger a trade war, because that would be in no one's interest. It's not, by the way, as if we're proposing to totally disregard the integrity of the single market, because goods that are going to be coming from Great Britain, the mainland, into Northern Ireland, which are destined then to go on to the Republic of Ireland, therefore the single market, will still be subject to all of the checks. So we're not sort of casually disregarding the interests of the European Union. We're making sure these changes will respect the integrity of the single market, which obviously is very important to the Europeans. So I think these are reasonable steps, and I see no reason at all why they should trigger a trade war. But I would say again, we hope that this can be done on a negotiated basis and that the protocol can simply be applied in a way that is proportionate and reasonable. But unfortunately, it's not being applied that way at the moment.
All right, one final question, Minister, very much on your watch, and I would imagine you've had sight of this now. One newspaper yesterday, the Daily Mail and its investigations unit, highlighted the problems of fraud in this country. We are, sadly, it would appear, the online fraud capital of the world, some £3 billion, more per head than any other Western economy, including the United States, Australia and Canada. And today, the newspaper is suggesting we must at least triple the number of fraud investigators to tackle what's called an epidemic of scams. Your reaction, if you would, to the initial investigation and that claim, Minister?
Yeah, well, it is a pretty huge problem. There's no question about that. My colleague, the Security Minister, Damien Hines, is running a whole task force designed to combat fraud, particularly online fraud, which is growing shockingly, and it grew during the pandemic as more people spent time online. And one of the things that I'm doing in my role as a Technology Minister is taking a bill through Parliament. In fact, I'm going to spend all day today, once I'm finished here, in Bill Committee, going through it line by line, is introducing a new piece of legislation, the Online Safety Bill, which contains in it, I think it's clauses 34 and 35, provisions that will require large social media platforms like Facebook and large search engines like Google to take steps to prevent adverts appearing on those platforms that promote fraud. Because very often the way people get sucked into these online frauds is they see an advert on Facebook or something comes up on Google, which on the face of it looks legitimate, but in fact is a scam, pretending to be an investment proposition or something. People transfer a chunk of their life savings and then find they just disappear in a puff of smoke. So we need Google and Facebook and those big firms to do a lot more. This bill will require them to do that. But I would also just say, since I've got your listeners' attention, I hope, if you receive any communication, an email, a text message, a phone call, you see an advert online, just be really, really careful. Don't just assume that anything you see could be a scam designed to relieve you of your hard-earned money. Be super sceptical, be super cautious, and only transfer money via online banking or any other means if you are absolutely certain, completely certain, that you know where it's going and you trust the counterparty. I think we've got to be just collectively sort of paranoid about these scams because they are, as you say, Nick, extremely widespread.
They are indeed. Lastly, that point is made by Dame Vera Baird QC, who is, of course, the Victims Commissioner. She's supporting the work the Daily Mail is trying to do here in making people aware and ensuring that they don't log on, click on, or whatever else. I'm sure you'd agree with that, wouldn't you, Minister?
100%, absolutely.
All right, grateful for your time. Chris Philp is Tech and Digital Economy Minister and Conservative MP, appearing here on LBC, where at 1 minute after 8, the news is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, 46 people have been found dead in the back of a lorry in Texas, close